So I'm going to talk about the impact on workers. This is joint work with Abby Adams-Prassel, Teodora Buneva, and Marta Golin. So we collected real-time data to fill in gaps across 3 survey waves, which are geographically representative surveys totaling more than 28,000 workers in the UK, US, and Germany. We thought this was important out of 2 reasons. One is because if you think back to Matt's talk and also to Giancarlo Corsetti's presentation 2 weeks ago, this can help us identify important firms, so occupations and industries which might be failing, and this can be important for supply chains. The other thing we wanted to provide real-time information on is which workers are being affected. So which demographic groups are suffering most and need a lifeline through government policies. And then we thought conventional data might also not be enough, not only because it's published with a lag, but also because some questions that might be specific to this crisis are not collected. For instance, there's new policies, such as the furloughing scheme in the UK, and also working from home has been something very important, and that's what I'm going to expand on now. So we asked all of our respondents, theoretically, what percentage of their tasks would they be able to do from home? So now here we see 2 occupational groups and their distribution of the share of tasks they could theoretically do from home. On the x-axis, you have the bins of how many tasks they can do from home. On the top, you see architecture and engineering occupations. Those would be architects, mechanical engineers, civil engineers. And in the bottom, you see office and administrative support. For instance, customer service representatives or secretaries. Now what you see is, in terms of the mean, they're almost identical. So about 57% of their tasks can be done from home. However, the distributions are very different. So this is the dispersion in terms of the standard deviation. And you can see that it's much larger for those in office and administrative support occupations. Why is this the case? This is because many more people working in office and administrative support are likely to not be able to do any of their tasks from home. So they report that they can do 0 of their tasks from home. In contrast, for architecture and engineering, this is a very small share. And we see the same thing for those that can do all of their tasks from home. So they report being able to do 100% of their tasks from home. Again, office and administrative support, there are many that can do that. In architecture and engineering, there are very few. So why is this so important? Think about the government's furloughing scheme the UK introduced. It's binary. Either you can work or not. So for people in office and administrative support, this can fit well because a lot of people can do 0 tasks from home and others can do 100% of their tasks from home. However, for those working in architecture and engineering, this is not a good fit. There, a short-time work scheme could allow you to work more gradually. You could have people work at a 50% scale, for instance. We find in our data that in Germany, job loss has been much lower. And our conjecture is that this might have to do with their well-established short-time work scheme, Kurzarbeit, which allows firms to adjust gradually. Now here in the bottom, you again see the architecture and engineering and office and administrative support, as you saw before. And in the top, I added food preparation and serving. These are cooks, bartenders, waiters, or waitresses. And what you can see is they can basically do none of their tasks from home. And on the top right-hand side, you can see the opposite, people working in computer and mathematical occupations, which for instance would be software developers or IT project managers, and they can do a relatively large share of their tasks from home. Now, if you think that this variation might be random, what I'm showing you here is the distribution of responses in the US. And now I'm going to overlay the ones from the UK, and you can see that they almost match identically. So there really seems to be a systematic variation in terms of the share of tasks that people within occupations can do from home. Here now, on the y-axis, so on the left, you can see 22 occupational categories. And on the x-axis, so at the bottom, you can see 22 industries. Now, what you see is that in the top, someone working in management, the cells are very dark. That means in management, across most industries, they can do a relatively, on average, a relatively large share of their tasks from home. However, If you look to the middle on the right, you see people working in food preparation, personal care and services, or building and grounds and cleaning maintenance. All of these people, no matter what industry, I mean, there is variation, but generally they can do a very small share of their tasks from home on average. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you for these same cells, the share of jobs that were lost. And what you're going to see is that it's basically the inverse. So if I flip this back and forth, you can see that those that are dark here and light are inverse on this figure. Now, another thing that I would like to point out here is that this, if you look at the scale on the right, so their occupation industry pairs, where almost 50% of their people lost their job in the US and the UK. For instance, personal care and service occupations in accommodation and food service activities, this for instance could be a massage therapist in a hotel, almost half of those people lost their job, just to show you the sheer scale of this crisis. But remember, I was stressing that the average is not the only thing we should care about in terms of the shared tasks that people can do from home. Here again, we see these 4 occupations, and we see the distribution of share of tasks that people can do from home that kept their job. And now I'm going to overlay the share of tasks people can do from home that lost their jobs. And you can see that for all 4 of these occupations, the ones that lost their job, it's shifted to the left. So even within occupations, those that can do, on average, less tasks from home are more likely to have lost their jobs. So now from our March to April survey wave, there are virtually no changes in the distributions. They're identical. However, in our newest survey wave in May, we see one change. So on the x-axis, each dot is an occupation in the UK. On the x-axis, you see the share of respondents that said they could do all tasks from home within a given occupation. And on the y-axis, you see the increase in the share of respondents saying they can do all tasks from home within an occupation in May. So if you're at this 0 line, that means the share didn't change. The same amount of people can do all tasks from home within an occupation. But what you see is that those occupations where already a large share of people could do all tasks from home, now in May can do even more of their tasks. So now even more people can do all tasks from home. So for us, this hints towards a job polarization that is going on, where there's some people that can work from home and now are becoming even more likely to work from home, and others that cannot. Whether this is being driven by employees learning and adapting to this new situation, or by employers making investments in the infrastructure and the way their firms work, we don't know. But we think this is a very interesting question going forward. One way, so through working from home, inequality is going to be exacerbated. And this is one way to show it. So on the left-hand side, we see the US, and on the right, the UK. And on the x-axis, we see individuals' income in 2019. And then on the y-axis, we see the average share of tasks people within this income bin can do from home. And you see this is strongly increasing in income. So people with higher income can do more tasks from home, so they've been less likely to lose their jobs, they can work more hours, so inequality is going to be exacerbated by this pandemic. Another thing that is being exacerbated are gender gaps. And this is unlike previous recessions. So in the financial crisis, for instance, male-dominated industries were hit much harder, for instance, manufacturing and construction. Now, due to these social distancing measures, it's services that have suffered a lot. And women tend to be overrepresented there, so women have lost more jobs. However, we find in our data that even controlling for a job and individual characteristics, women are still more likely to have lost their jobs. We don't know why this is the case, but one thing that could play a role, and here I again want you to think in terms of bottlenecks based on the previous talk, and that might be the closure of schools and nurseries. So here we see the time spent by people who are working from home on childcare and homeschooling. The blue bars are men, the red bars are women, the left is the US, the middle the UK, and the right is Germany. So what we see across all 3 countries, amongst people working from home, women are on average spending more time in childcare and also more time on homeschooling. So this could be one reason that we're seeing these increases in gender inequality. So now in terms of the outlook about respondents' expectations, they're also quite dire. So here we see the average probability with which people who still have a job are afraid of losing it. The blue line is the US and the red line is the UK. So we see that about 1/3, with a probability of 1/3, on average, people are fearing that they're going to lose their job before the end of August. Now this has decreased slightly, but I'm not sure that's a reason for optimism, which is what I'm coming to in this slide. So here we're asking people that are looking for jobs how likely they think they're going to find a job. On the left-hand side, we're asking within the next 2 months, and these are only people that are searching. And on the right-hand side, within 6 months. The blue bars are the US, the red bars are the UK. There's 3 things I would like to point out here. One is that on average, people think they will find a job with a 0.5, so with 50% probability in 2 months and about 2/3 probability in 6 months. This is extremely low compared to normal times. And in normal times, people actually tend to overestimate their job finding probabilities. The second thing I would like to point out is that in the US, people are more optimistic. So in the previous slide, we saw they're more pessimistic about losing their job, which could be true because firing costs are lower in the US. But they're also more optimistic about finding jobs, which could be true because hiring costs are lower. The other thing I wanted to point out is that if you look on the right-hand side, people have become more pessimistic about finding jobs. So if you look about the change from early April to mid-May, both for the US and the UK, these bars have decreased. So people have become more pessimistic about finding jobs going forward. And for us, going forward, what we're thinking about doing in this project in this very short run, we're working on an in-depth analysis of the furloughing scheme in the UK. We think this scheme is extremely important in buffering the pandemic, and especially in the comparison to Germany, it suggests that a more gradual scheme might be the way forward. In terms of our project in the medium run, we also try to understand the changing landscape of work. How are people's preferences about working from home and type of contracts, flexible versus non-flexible, permanent and temporary, how are these changing? And we might be expanding to more countries, which is subject to funding. And then in the long run, we want to look at how working from home and automation are going to interplay. So this recession is probably going to accelerate the rate at which firms are deepening their capital investments and trying to automate. And we think that this is going to interact in some way with working from home. Thank you very much.